My friends, brothers, and sisters, in the spirit of freedom and dignity today, we gather not merely to remember a man of the past, but to reflect upon a voice of timeless wisdom. George Washington, the first President of the United States of America, was not only a general of battles, but a general of principles, a man who knew that true power lies not in might, but in moral courage. In a time of revolution, he spoke of unity. In a world of uncertainty, he reminded his people and the world that liberty must be guarded by justice, and that leadership demands humility. Today, as we stand upon the shoulders of great leaders who came before us, we revisit his words, not because they are old, but because they are eternal. Because in every quote we find a call to conscience, a light to guide our steps, and a challenge to lead with honor. Let us open our hearts to the wisdom of George Washington, and may we find in it the strength to build bridges where there are divides, and to lift nations where there is despair. Leadership rooted in moral integrity is the essence of what made George Washington not just a founding father, but a timeless example for leaders across centuries. He understood that power without principle is dangerous, and that true leadership must always be guided by the compass of conscience. In an age of revolution, ambition, and uncertainty, Washington chose restraint over tyranny, humility over ego, and service over self-interest. It was not simply what he accomplished that made him remarkable. It was how he chose to lead. He could have declared himself king, as many wanted, yet he refused absolute power because he believed in the promise of a republic governed by the people, for the people. His actions demonstrated that leadership is not about domination, but about responsibility. He placed the welfare of the new nation above his own desires, willingly stepping down after 2 terms as president, setting a precedent that would define the American presidency for generations. His integrity was not performative. It was deeply rooted in his belief that a leader's character is more important than charisma. He believed that if a leader loses their moral foundation, they lose the right to lead. George Washington's honesty, his discipline, and his sense of duty showed that leadership is not about speeches or grand gestures, but about consistent ethical behavior. He was not perfect. He was a man of his time, but he aspired to something greater, and that aspiration itself shaped a nation's destiny. In every great decision he made, there was a quiet strength behind it, a sense that leadership means setting an example even when it is inconvenient, unpopular, or difficult. Today, as the world struggles with corruption, ego-driven politics, and leadership crises, the example of George Washington stands as a reminder that real authority comes not from position or title, but from trust. Trust that is earned through honesty, discipline, humility, and a genuine commitment to the common good. His leadership teaches us that if we want to build lasting institutions and inspire future generations, we must lead with the kind of moral courage that puts values above victory. Unity as the foundation of a strong nation was one of the most consistent and urgent messages in George Washington's life and legacy. He understood that the greatest threat to the young United States was not a foreign invader, but internal division. In his farewell address, he warned against the dangers of factionalism, sectionalism, and party politics, not because he feared disagreement, but because he feared disunity. For Washington, unity was not about silencing different voices. It was about harmonizing them for the greater good. He believed that a nation built on diverse states, backgrounds, and interests could only survive if bound by a common identity, a shared purpose, and a mutual respect. At a time when loyalty to individual states often outweighed loyalty to the country, he championed the idea of a united American people. He knew that real strength came not from the power of one region, one group, or one ideology, but from the collective will of a people determined to stand together. Washington's leadership in uniting the colonies during and after the Revolutionary War reflected his deep commitment to this principle. As commander-in-chief, he did not just fight battles. He built bridges among competing factions, rival armies, and skeptical allies. His ability to unify was not rooted in force, but in trust, patience, and the consistent practice of inclusion. He reached across divides, refused to engage in petty rivalries, and emphasized the need for cooperation over competition. Throughout his presidency, he avoided entanglements that might divide the country further. He resisted the push from various factions to favor one region or interest over another. He worked to ensure that federal policies reflected the needs of the entire nation, not just a few. This balanced approach became a model for governance rooted in fairness and cohesion. Washington saw political unity as vital to national identity. Without it, he believed, no laws could be strong enough and no military powerful enough to hold a country together. Even now, in our modern era, his call for unity echoes with relevance. In a time when nations face polarization and distrust, Washington's wisdom reminds us that no great endeavor can be sustained if people are divided in purpose and spirit. True progress is not born from conflict within, but from collaboration. His legacy urges us to rise above narrow interests, resist division, and come together for something greater than ourselves. It is in unity that a people find their strength, and in that strength they build a nation that can endure the tests of time. The power of humility in authority is a virtue George Washington embodied with rare consistency and quiet strength. Despite being one of the most revered figures in American history, he never allowed the immense power he held to corrupt his character or cloud his judgment. From his earliest days as a military leader to his presidency, Washington carried himself with a deep awareness of the responsibility that came with leadership. He understood that greatness is not proclaimed, it is proven through restraint, service, and the ability to put the needs of others above personal ambition. Washington's humility was perhaps most clearly seen in his willingness to relinquish power. After leading the Continental Army to victory in the Revolutionary War, he voluntarily resigned his commission and returned to civilian life. This act stunned the world. At a time when victorious generals typically seized power and declared themselves rulers, Washington chose a path of self-restraint. It was not because he lacked the support to remain in command, but because he believed in the principle that leadership must serve the people, not dominate them. His return to private life was a statement to the world that America would be different, that its leaders would answer to the people, not the other way around. When he was later unanimously elected as the first president of the United States, he again approached the role with humility. He did not see the presidency as a throne, but as a temporary stewardship, an opportunity to serve a young and fragile nation. He avoided the trappings of monarchy and aristocracy, even refusing to be addressed with royal titles. Instead, he insisted on being called simply Mr. President. Through this, he reminded his fellow citizens that leadership in a republic must remain grounded in modesty, not inflated by ego or grandeur. Washington's humility was also evident in his acknowledgement of his own limitations. He often spoke openly of his lack of political experience and leaned on the counsel of others. He surrounded himself with capable advisers, including political opponents, because he valued wisdom over personal loyalty. This openness to dialogue and dissent is a sign of true confidence, for only a secure and humble leader can accept criticism without feeling threatened by it. He made mistakes, but he did not hide from them. Instead, He learned from them and sought to improve. In the face of growing political pressures and personal attacks, Washington remained focused on the larger vision of a united and free nation. He never allowed pride to dictate policy, nor did he seek revenge or personal glory. He led not to be admired, but to fulfill a duty. This deep-rooted humility earned him not only respect in his time, but admiration through the centuries. It taught Americans and the world that leadership is not about how loudly one speaks, but how sincerely one listens, and not about how much one commands, but how faithfully one serves. In a world where leaders are often driven by ego and personal gain, Washington's example remains a powerful reminder that humility is not weakness. It is strength under control. It is the quiet power that builds trust, inspires loyalty, and sustains nations. His legacy shows us that true leadership begins with the heart of a servant and the discipline to put others first, even when one holds the highest authority. Liberty sustained by justice and responsibility was at the very heart of George Washington's understanding of freedom. He did not view liberty as a license to do whatever one pleases, but rather as a sacred trust that must be guarded by a deep commitment to fairness, law, and accountability. To him, freedom was not simply the absence of tyranny. It was the presence of moral order, civic virtue, and a shared responsibility to protect the rights of all citizens. He believed that liberty without responsibility would descend into chaos, and that justice without liberty would become oppression. Washington knew that the birth of a free nation was only the beginning of a much longer and more difficult journey. The challenge was not just to break free from British rule, but to create a system where liberty could thrive without falling into disorder. That required laws that applied to all, leaders who were accountable to the people, and citizens who understood that freedom carries duties as well as rights. In his farewell address, he warned against the erosion of moral values and civic responsibility, recognizing that these were the pillars upon which liberty stood. Throughout his leadership, Washington emphasized the importance of a just government, a government that not only protected people's freedoms, but also upheld fairness, integrity, and equality before the law. He resisted the idea of absolute power because he understood that unchecked authority always threatens the liberty of the people. At the same time, he rejected the notion that liberty could survive in a society without discipline or shared values. Freedom, in his view, required self-restraint, respect for law, and a collective sense of duty to the nation and to one another. His leadership reflected these values consistently. He supported a strong yet limited federal government, one that could enforce the law but remain accountable to the people it served. He believed that citizens had a role to play, not just in electing representatives, but in living lives rooted in honor, respect, and civic participation. Without such commitment from the public, he feared that liberty would dissolve into selfishness and democracy would fail. He trusted the American people, but he also reminded them that freedom must be earned and preserved through active responsibility. Washington's legacy teaches us that justice and liberty are not competing ideals. They are interdependent. Justice ensures that liberty does not become a tool for exploitation or abuse, while liberty ensures that justice remains the servant of the people, not their master. This delicate balance was something he constantly sought to protect. He knew that lasting freedom is not guaranteed by constitutions alone, but by the everyday actions of just leaders and responsible citizens. Even now, his words and example challenge us to remember that freedom is not free. It requires vigilance, sacrifice, and a deep sense of justice for all, not just a privileged few. It demands that we not only claim our rights, but also fulfill our duties. Washington's wisdom reminds us that liberty must be lived with purpose, guarded with principle, and shared with fairness, or it risks becoming a hollow ideal. His vision of liberty was one in which every citizen, regardless of station, held a piece of the promise and a share in the responsibility to protect it. Warnings against the dangers of political division were among George Washington's most urgent and prophetic messages to the young American Republic. He had witnessed firsthand how factions and rivalries could tear at the fabric of unity, even in the earliest stages of the nation's formation. Though he was a man of deep conviction, Washington understood that unchecked political partisanship could become a destructive force, one that would place personal or party interests above the welfare of the country. In his farewell address, he did not speak as a politician, but as a statesman appealing to reason, cautioning that intense party spirit could lead to bitterness, instability, and the erosion of national unity. Washington had no formal political party affiliation and believed that governing should serve the entire nation, not cater to one side or another. He feared that once political loyalty to a party became stronger than loyalty to the Constitution or the common good, it would corrupt the principles of representative government. He warned that parties would provoke the spirit of revenge, encourage misrepresentations, and give rise to leaders who would seek power by dividing the people rather than uniting them. These were not abstract fears. They were grounded in what he had already seen begin to take shape in his own lifetime. Despite efforts to remain neutral, Washington observed the growing tensions between emerging political factions led by men like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. He saw how these divisions created conflict within his own cabinet, where debate turned into rivalry and disagreement turned into resentment. Washington feared that such divisions would spill beyond policy debates and into the lives of everyday Americans, turning neighbors against each other and weakening the nation's ability to function as a unified whole. To Washington, political division was not just a threat to civil harmony, it was a threat to the very survival of the Republic. He believed that foreign powers could easily exploit domestic discord, manipulating partisan divides to weaken American independence and sovereignty. He urged future leaders to rise above partisanship and lead with impartiality and patriotism, knowing that enduring progress comes from cooperation, not conflict. He wanted public servants to be guided by principle, not popularity, by duty, not division. His message remains deeply relevant in the modern world, where political polarization often dominates national discourse and weakens the bonds of mutual respect and shared identity. Washington's call for unity does not mean the absence of debate, nor does it demand uniformity of opinion. Rather, it asks that citizens and leaders alike remember their highest obligation to the nation, its founding values, and its future. Constructive disagreement, guided by a shared commitment to truth and the public good, is essential to democracy, but when disagreement turns into hatred, and when parties care more about winning than governing, the foundation of the Republic begins to crack. Washington's wisdom encourages a form of patriotism that transcends party lines, a love for country that is greater than loyalty to any political agenda. His legacy is a challenge to all generations to resist division that breeds contempt and to build dialogue that leads to solutions. He reminds us that the strength of a nation lies not in how loudly its people shout across the aisle, but in how deeply they listen to one another, and how firmly they stand together when the country calls.